Welcome to the Mergers and Acquisitions Exit Strategies event, co-hosted by Upsize Minnesota and Club Entrepreneur. Hi, my name is Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club, Upsize Minnesota, and my group, Club Entrepreneur, welcome to our workshop on mergers and acquisitions. Our focus today is going to be on the M&A market and exit strategies, and to help companies with all facets of the sale and buying process, and introduce a panel of experts who can serve as your trusted advisors, Upsize Minnesota and Club Entrepreneur has assembled today's event. Upsize Minnesota is a how-to magazine devoted to helping business owners build bigger and more profitable companies. Club Entrepreneur and my firm, Brimacombe & Associates, support folks like you, helping you refine strategies, assemble resources, and secure funding. In our efforts to provide actionable content, Upsize Minnesota and Club Entrepreneur offer you today's panel. And as such, I want to introduce you to our event sponsors. Eide Bailly is a certified public accounting firm. Franklin Partners is a mergers and acquisitions firm. Highland Bank, a community bank. L. Harris Partners, a financial and strategic consulting and advisory firm. And Winthrop & Weinstein, a general practice law firm. So thank you very much to our event sponsors. With that, let me introduce the panelists. I'm going to give everybody just a brief introduction, let you know who's here, and then we'll circle back to them, let them tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. To my immediate left, Joe Caruso is a partner at Franklin Partners. Jeff Johnson is a partner at L. Harris Partners. Mark Johnson is a mergers and acquisitions and corporate attorney and shareholder at Winthrop & Weinstein. Melissa Johnston is a VP at business banking at Highland Bank. Yeah, I went through the phone book and took all the Johnsons and Johnstons I could find. Yeah. All right, so shifting up, we're onto the R's. Tom Rushfelt, a local entrepreneur who sold a couple of companies, including most recently his SaaS business by the name of Intertax. And then Brad Tyson, a partner in charge of the Minneapolis office and tax partner at Eide Bailly. So now that you've been introduced to everyone, let's hear from them about how they fit into today's topic, a little bit about their background and their firms. I'm going to start with Joe again to my immediate left, and I always have to tell the story. He probably gets sick of me telling it because I do every time. But Joe and I started at Piper Jaffray the same exact time in 1989.
We were fingerprinted together.
Yes, so we went through literally fingerprinting, and if you do this, you go to jail, conversation, and if you go through these walls over here, we have to shoot you. So we got the same training the same day. And
my name was Johnson back then.
Can I move?
Anyway, Joe, tell us a little bit about you and your firm.
Sure. First of all, thank you all for being here today. It's great to see some old friends and lots of potential new friends. I'm one of the partners at Franklin Partners, which is a classic lower middle market M&A boutique based here in Minneapolis. There are 5 of us, and we focus most of our efforts on representing owner entrepreneurs in sales situations. I spent a dozen years at Piper here in Minneapolis in the corporate finance department, back when it was 25 people when I joined, and when I left it was 250 people, so it tells you how that business changed over the years. And Chip Myers and I joined forces in 2001 to start Franklin Partners.
Great, and Jeff Johnson is at L. Harris Partners, and L. Harris Partners has been a longtime supporter of these lunches, so we're greatly appreciative of that. I know we have one person from the team over here. Do we have anybody else? And anyway, we appreciate their support. So Jeff, tell us a little bit about yourself and L. Harris Partners.
I'm a Johnson, sorry. My background, I'm a CPA by background. I gave that up because it was boring. Sorry. Been in the M&A space for 30 plus years. I started at a Big 12 CPA firm, just gave away my age, but worked in private equity for many years as director of acquisition and planning. Put my boss in jail. As a 29-year-old kid, worked for the FBI wearing a wire. So I can also talk about that. It's a kind of scary process after the first 3 months. Trying to convince the FBI you weren't part of it. Went to work for the McGladrey organization. I've been corrected because it's RSM now. Led the financial consulting side, the national consulting practice, worked developing their evaluation, M&A, private equity type consulting. My focus has been really preparing business owners for sale, staging the house, and helping them understand what buyers are going to do to them as they go through the sales process. L. Harris Partners focuses on value creation, exit transition planning, and strategic planning.
Okay, great. Mark, still in the Johnson's part of the phone book here. Winthrop and Weinstein has been a longtime supporter of Upsize Magazine, and you've been involved in a number of these panels with us in the past. We certainly appreciate your support. Tell us a little bit about you and your firm.
Sure. Again, Mark Johnson. I'm a business transactional attorney. I spend about half my time on merger and acquisition transactions, about half my time working with a group of clients on their business needs. I joined the firm. I'm out of law school in '86. We were about 20 some attorneys at the time. Winthrop and Weinstein is a full service firm now. We have about 130 attorneys, so it's been a really nice growth process, and it's been organic. We haven't gone out and merged with other practices. We've just had a good base of clients and grown with our clients. So it's been a real fun process to be a part of. I guess I enjoy the M&A practice a lot. Right now, I'd say there's more merger and acquisition work. The last 3 years have been very, very busy. So when I say 50-50, it's probably more like 70-30 at this time. But I enjoy helping people through that process. It's a life-changing event for clients, and it's fun to be a part of that.
Great, thank you. Melissa, tell us a little bit about you and your firm, and like a couple other firms in front of you, you folks have supported a number of our panels, and we're very appreciative of that.
Wonderful.
So,
thanks, Rick.
Yep.
So my name is Melissa Johnston, and I'm a business banker at Highland Bank. Highland Bank's charter was originally in 1940, and we've evolved into 5 locations today. It merged some different banks together in 1995 and bought Ridgedale State Bank in 2007, and that's where I'm out at the Ridgedale location. Our CEO and owner is here today. Thanks, Rick. He's over at that table over there. We guide our clients in making sound business decisions. So we are involved in many of our business owners' everyday lives and talking with them about successes and challenges and try to make banking easy and save them time. I've been lending for 15 years. My job right out of college was on the due diligence team of a bank holding company when they were buying banks. So we looked at 5 acquisitions during the 2 years that I was on the team, and we bought 2 banks. So now I enjoy being on the front line and working with my clients through those issues, navigating the process, starting a business, buying a business, and just going through those everyday challenges. Thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. Tom Rushfelt, as I mentioned, is a local entrepreneur who sold a couple of his companies. Tom, tell us a little bit about your background and what you're up to.
Okay. I'm originally from Minneapolis. I'm a mechanical engineer from the University of Minnesota, and I got my MBA in finance from Michigan. From there, I went into general management consulting with Deloitte & Touche. Back then, it was called Touche Ross. And ultimately then served as the CFO of Dart Transit for 4 years. After that, I co-founded a couple of companies, sold a few, but most recently I was the co-founder of a company called Intertax, and Intertax was a software as service business that we ran for 12 years and then sold to Ceridian Corporation, Comdata division. And in that process, I worked with Joe Caruso and Franklin Capital. So I'm here to talk about that story, I think.
Thank you.
It's a good one.
Great. And Brad Tyson, again, partner in charge of the Minneapolis office at Eide Bailly. Eide Bailly's been involved with us in the past as well, so thank you, Brad, for that support. Tell us a little bit about you and your firm.
I have been in the field. We say the people that got out of public accounting couldn't handle the tax season, so Jeff, right back at you. But I've been working in the field almost 30 years, joined Eide Bailly in 1994, And at the time, we had just opened our Minneapolis office in 1989. So we had 15 people at the time. We have since grown to, in the Minneapolis office, we have about 125 people. We're a regional accounting firm. Currently, I think, rated number 19 in the country, 29 offices around the country, and we provide the traditional accounting and tax work for mostly closely held companies, and we have quite a bit of resources to help businesses in international and state and local and a number of different areas now. So I deal with a lot of manufacturing and distribution companies. I've been through a lot of deals over the years, succession planning and actual sales and purchases. So happy to be here. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you. So let's come back to this end. Joe, we've heard from everybody about their own background. Tell us a little bit about your perspectives on the topic, global views on our subject today, and we'll start down here with you.
Sure. One of my pet themes, and it's timely seeing as we're in the middle of March Madness season, is if you are a business owner and a potential M&A client, advisory client, it's great to assemble a group of subject matter experts. You need subject matter experts. But if they're not functioning as a team, you're not getting full value. And the analogy to March Madness is you can put 5 All-Americans on the floor and not win the tournament. In fact, there are teams that have proven that over the years. If the players are focused on hogging the ball and scoring points and not rebounding, not playing defense, not communicating, not doing all the other stuff a team should do if it's a good team, you're not well served. So that's one overarching theme I would tee up for discussion by other members of the panel.
Great, thank you. Jeff.
I think my perspective comes from, I've done probably 200 or 300 due diligence assignments on the buy side. It always amazed me how a seller would not be prepared, both with the appropriate information as well as emotionally for the process that they were going through. My favorite assignments were those that really couldn't tell me what their growth strategy was, what their financial controls are, how their management team would operate the business after they were purchased. And it always just amazed me how many sellers thought they could control what the buyer was going to do after the fact. So my job in that process was to lower the price and extend the terms. And in those situations where they weren't prepared, that was a very easy process. Even though they, quote, had a contract, if I didn't have a 20% price reduction, I failed. So that's my perspective.
20%, all right, great. Mark.
I think a big part of the attorney's role, well, first of all, I agree. I would echo what Joe said. You need a properly coordinated team of experts to get through this process and get through it well. I think the upfront planning that people need to do is critical, both personally and for your company, polishing the apple at the company level and making sure you got your personal goals and aspirations and all that stuff figured out at an individual level. All of that's a critical part of it. And then I think a big part of our role is to just to make sure that the entrepreneur gets through the process with as minimal risk as possible. I mean, a big part of a lawyer's job is to manage the risk. And we take that very seriously, and that happens both in managing the due diligence. If you're on the sales side, you got to put that due diligence out there in a way that makes everyone look competent and qualified and can enhance value as opposed to enabling people to chop away at the value. And then on the transaction documents, just making sure you manage the risks on those. There's a lot of, I don't know, how many of you have been through M&A transactions, but you get these big, thick documents, and every word means something. And you gotta read those words, you gotta pay attention to them, you gotta understand them, you gotta talk them through with your client, and manage that risk for your client. So that's kind of how I see my role.
Great, thank you. Melissa.
Yeah, so my perspective is from the banker's side is to not skimp on the due diligence. If anyone wants to grab coffee, I could give you a lot of stories that we hear after the deals close. Just doing these financing acquisitions over the last 3 years, I'm averaging over one a month, and so I've seen a lot of things go down. So I would just say to do the due diligence, and then just shop around for financing. There's lots of options out there, and unless you are extremely cash rich or have an absurd amount of liquidity, now is a really good time to get financing and to just really work with those financing partners, whether it's a community bank or other financing partners, to make sure the package is right for you. And as a buyer, you'd want those deals structured with limited prepayment penalties. So as the course of the next 3 or 4 years evolve and you have that retained earnings and positive trends, you can prepay that any debt that you took out while the rates are low in this environment. The trends are good. The economy overall is positive. It's just a good time to be looking for those debt vehicles. And also, business acquisitions are typically light on collateral, so you do just want to make sure you're talking through all the different options with possible financing folks, because not everyone will lend without collateral.
Great, thanks, Melissa. Tom.
Okay. I thought I'd just give you a very quick overview of the actual transaction that we went through selling Intertax, and a little bit of background on it, just to put the whole thing in perspective. And it'll take me maybe a couple more minutes. But basically, Intertax was a startup, and I was the original founder of the company. We operated for 12 years prior to the sale. It was a software as service business where we downloaded GPS, fuel purchase, dispatch data from trucking companies around the country. We cleaned and tested the data. We recreated the exact route of travel of trucks and used that information to do two things, basically to provide compliance services for the trucking companies where they had to file tax returns to the various states that they operated in, and we did that for them. And then also, once we had the cleaned up database from the truck operations, we were able to provide quite a number of analytics, summary information and detailed information to them to help them improve their operations. They bought us, they signed up with us for our compliance work, but they really enjoyed and took advantage of the analytics that we provided as a side shoot of the project. By automating the process and doing it in a centralized way and developing pretty good software and in some cases manual intervention and cleaning of the data, we could do it more accurately and cheaper than the trucking companies could do this service themselves. And so in a sense, they got the analytics and comparative industry information as a free service. So we grew fairly quickly. In fact, sales weren't usually the issue. It was usually our ability to deliver the product that constrained our growth. And by the time we reached the sales cycle, we had grown to over 300 trucking company clients, and we were providing services to over 100,000 trucks. And we were the largest provider of this type of service in the nation. And we competed against a lot of very larger corporations. So we had a pool of buyers that were pretty obvious out there. And we started the business from the outset with the intent of not going public and not doing it forever, but at some point actually selling to one of these other providers of trucking services. So when we got to the sale process, we interviewed 3 different investment bankers. We selected Franklin Capital because they felt like they were the best fit and more related to the size of the business that we were actually trying to sell. And we worked with Joe. So I've gotten to know Joe over the years and throughout the process, and I consider him a friend as well as a valued business associate. After they analyzed our business, when we thought we were getting ready to go to market, they basically said we weren't ready. They said they gave us and they helped us develop some specific financial goals that when we reached these goals, they thought we'd be closer to being ready. You're never ready, but we'd be closer to ready. And it took us about 18 months to reach the point where we actually went out and started the sale process. Franklin prepared a confidential offering document, which they did a nice job and presented a lot of details. They also identified a large pool of potential buyers beyond which what we would have originally thought of ourselves. And they submitted that confidential offering document to about 50 different potential buyers. Based on the responses, we shared detailed information about the company with 4 to 6 most likely buyers, and we actually made site visits to about 3, maybe 4 of the potential buyers, where we went and met with their management team and figured out how our business would work with their business. Between the first offers we received and the final sale price, the final deal, the prices more than tripled. So when we received our first offers, we were quite disappointed. And Joe had to sit us down and settle us down and say...
More than once.
More than once. And say, really, this is just the beginning of the process. You have to be patient with it. And so as we were figuring out how we were going to withdraw from the sales process and keep running the company, because the company was solid, we were doing very well, we were okay to keep going, but we were also felt it was a good time to sell. We went through the full cycle working with Joe and with the buyers, and ended up with the final sale price that was 2.1 times sales. It was a cash offer to buy our business, with an earnout of another 1.3 times sales, for it was a total of about 3.5 times sales that we ultimately negotiated as the sale price. The only catch was there was an earnout for about 1/3 of that. So that was both making us nervous, but it also allowed us to get a higher price because we knew certain things that were going to happen with the business that the buyer was not comfortable with accepting at face value. For example, we had gone through a deferred price increase, meaning we re-signed all of our accounts with a price increase in the second year, which was going to clip in during and after the sale itself. So the revenue was guaranteed to grow a certain level, and it was contractually tied to our accounts. It was actually a good thing to do at the time of the sale. So we closed the deal about 3 months later. We worked with a legal firm and with Joe. We worked with Faegre and Benson, and they did a nice job for us. It did take, the other thing we did really well is that my partner, the second largest shareholder and co-founder of the business, ran the day-to-day operations, and I spent a large portion of my time managing the sale and responding to inquiries from buyers, etc. So it was that way we didn't drop the ball on the operations of the business. We couldn't afford to do that for 2 reasons. One is if the sale didn't go through, we didn't want to have a crippled business, and 2, if the sale did go through, we knew there was going to be an earnout. So either way, we had to make it work. The deal did require the buyer to maintain a hands-off during the earnout process, which we knew was fraught with risk, but we were quite frankly willing to sell at the cash price without the earnout. So to us, the earnout was going to be a bonus, but we also were pretty confident we would get it. So they did, and in fact, all parties cooperated, and we received virtually 100% of the earnout, which I'm told is rare. And the process altogether, I think, in my opinion at least, it was kind of a textbook process. I mean, all the things fell into place. We seemed to do all the right things. It seemed to work out well. But I can tell you it was one of the most stressful 6 months of my career.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you. Brad, tell us a little bit about kind of the lens you look through on the topic today.
Well, obviously, I look through the tax lens most of the time. Certainly, the way the deal is structured can affect the taxation, so we deal a lot with that. And what the seller wants, the buyer doesn't want to give them, and what the buyer wants, the seller doesn't want to give them. So obviously, there's some negotiation there. But You know, it was alluded to earlier, but one of the important pieces of selling the business is really getting it ready for sale. And like I said, that was alluded to. But you know, we kind of look at that as if you're selling your house. You know, the realtors always talk about staging your house and going through and fixing things up and cleaning it up and decluttering, and we like to think of it as the same way with your financial statements and your business. You know, a lot of owners might pile in some personal expenses through the business. I'm not saying it happens ever, but you know, that there's some cleanup there. And obviously, if you've got a good management team, and you know, the bankers like to see an audit versus maybe a compilation or just a tax return. So, you know, those are things that you can do ahead of time to prepare yourself for the sale. So that's always important. The other thing that you know, you look at is there's different ways of selling or transitioning your business, and it's not always just an outside sale. I mean, there's options like selling it to an ESOP or management, or you know, if you have family members, obviously transitioning it to kids. So you know, keep that in mind as we proceed here today.
Okay, great. Hey, stay down there for a minute. You've mentioned a little bit about the sale altering the taxation for the different types of structure, also how that impacts the personal taxes. So we have a audience of general business here, so don't get too deep into the weeds, but at a high level, just talk about how structure impacts taxation and how that impacts the owner's personal taxes.
To keep it simple, usually a seller wants to sell stock because you get capital gain treatment on that sale. Buyer wants to buy assets so they can get a step up in basis and depreciate those assets, get a quicker write-off. So that's the main strategy. So there's a big difference in the taxation. You know, if you look at the highest tax federal rate right now, between that and the capital gain rate, it's 20% difference. Trump tells us that'll be different in a year or so, but we'll see what happens with that. So the way it's structured is important. From the buyer side, you know, when I think back in the day, 20 years ago, there was a lot of covenant not to competes were valued at a high amount because the buyer could write those off over, say, a 5-year period. The government got a little smarter and changed that. So a covenant not to compete now is a 15-year amortization for the buyer, which is really the same as goodwill. So there isn't a, you know, from a legal standpoint, it's important to have a covenant not to compete for a buyer, but the dollar amount placed on it isn't as valuable to the buyer. So from the seller's standpoint, that's ordinary income to you. So, you know, nowadays we see those amounts being a lot smaller just because it doesn't affect the buyer and it helps the seller. So there's different, certainly different strategies along the way. Sometimes, excuse me, sometimes the company cannot be sold as an asset sale because of some existing contracts with customers, and there are ways around that to actually sell stock or member units and still get an asset treatment. So the way it's structured is important. On the personal side of things, you know, like I said, the capital gain is 20% federal versus a 40% rate. So that's important. And then after the sale, you know, typically you've got a seller who's had all this business income and wages along the way, and their whole tax return kind of shifts sometimes to a lot of investment income and things like that. So their tax return changes, different types of planning involved in that. And usually on a sell, we're looking at some estate planning too, because now you've got some liquidity and maybe more net worth than you thought you had before.
Okay, great, thanks.
Just real quick, one other point on that. You talked about the stock, and you touched on that, Brad, and I think that's right, doing a stock or an asset. Sometimes the driver on a stock or asset, in addition to taxes, are the hard to transfer assets. You might have some really hard to get licensing or permits or agreements in place for reimbursement that are really hard to get reissued, and or there might be consents to transfer. So and people end up selling stock at that point in time because those assets will just go with the entity as long as there are not change control provisions in there. And then you mentioned then people can get the asset transfer tax effect by making a 338H10 election. That's how you go about that. But that's become more of a driver. We're working on a health-related business, and they have all these third-party payer agreements. Those are really hard to get. And so what we're doing, this is being pushed as a stock transfer, but because the entity is a pass-through entity, we're willing to accommodate a 338H10 so they get an asset tax treatment.
Great, so. Great. Thank you. Jeff, in your comments, you talked about working with a firm for a number of years, sometimes 2 to 5 years ahead of selling. Why is it so important to work with the owner that far in advance, and why does that process take so long?
I think you just heard 3 examples. I mean, it's not a quick activity to do the legal work, the accounting work related to changing ownership structures or getting these structures in place. But if you're doing it right at the end event, it really doesn't work. So you're taking what you can get at that point in time. The biggest part of what I see and what takes so long is really getting an entrepreneur owner ready for sale. The emotions that they go through in this process, I think Tom mentioned that as part of that. It kills more deals than you guys would care to know. I just left a meeting this morning where the owner of the business told the buyer that he was going to hire all his employees and couldn't fire them for 5 years, and that was the main deal point this morning. And so I called a little recess and explained to the owner, and he had a few choice words for me. I've been working with this particular company for 3 years. I thought we had all that under control, but the buyer tripped his trigger. His blood pressure went up, and he did it intentionally. And so we calmed him down. He went back in. Hopefully nothing's fallen apart between when I came here and I'm going back. But as I look at it, I think one of the keys that people need to understand, so all the business owners, close your eyes, look in that crystal ball, and tell me when you're going to die, when you're going to become disabled, when you're going to have a dispute with your business partner, when the market's going to change from a buyer market to a seller market. All these caveats. So if you can predict that with certainty, I will tell you 3 years before that, you need to start. So why do you want to do this? I mean, it's a long time process. It's not a one-time event. My daughter was just home from college, and I saw her cramming for an exam. And I was going through the process of the preparation, and I thought, a lot of my business owners that come to me want that final cram for this big event, and it just doesn't work. There's too much risk that's created that really can't be managed by the advisors that you're working through. The advisors really do know what they're talking about. Most business owners go through this once, maybe twice, and they really don't understand the processes that occur, what a buyer is going to actually do to them, and I use those words intentionally. I was paid a lot of money over the years to really get people upset, so they didn't really get involved in actually managing the process. And they really need to be prepared, and the value creation is the dollar amount. What they need to get out is the management team that they need in place that can manage the business after they leave. So there's a whole bunch of value drivers that have to be prepared, and it's not a 6-month process. It's not a 1-month process. It is 2 to 3 years plus to get your house in order. And I can give you a perfect example. We're working with a client that father started the business, brought the brother in, 4 owners in it. They brought the second generation in to manage the business. The founder died, no agreements in place, no compensation plans in place. They brought us in to help them manage the business, to turn it around, because it was all kept inside the one founder's head. And so it's been a struggle. So now we're going from a very thriving, very profitable business to almost a turnaround in a very short period of time, because nobody knew what was going on in the business. And so that's a key component of the length of time that it takes to get these management teams in place and the processes and systems.
Great, thanks. Mark, let's stay on the topic of challenges for business owners. What are some of the other challenges that they need to be prepared for?
Well, I would say on the, I wrote down 3 points on that on the sales side. First one I wrote down was disclosure and communication. And so a challenge you have as a business owner is, who do I get involved, and when do I let them know, and when do I get involved, and to what extent I get them involved. You can't go at this by yourself. You need to have key people in your management team helping you through all stages of the process. But at the same time, you don't want to let all your employees know, and you want to keep it as confidential as possible. So that's kind of a fine line you walk. And then when do you reach out to customers? A buyer's going to want to contact your customers and confirm your business. And as part of that process, when's the right time to do that? That's normally a later in the process time, when everything is pretty much locked down. Then you kind of, okay, these are the keys of the kingdom. I'm going to let you contact some key customers at that point. But I think that's a big part of it, is just thinking through and then implementing communication, disclosure issues. That's always a challenge. I think, Tom, you had mentioned this earlier when you were going through the sale process. It's very important to not get too distracted from your core business, because people, maybe it sells, maybe it doesn't. So there's always a chance the sale's not gonna happen, and then you're gonna continue operating that business. And as important, if it does sell, you wanna deliver the maximum value. And so you wanna make sure that everything's going great during the sale process too. All this stuff kind of ties together. We talked about getting a team of advisors. In order to really properly run your business during this process and not take your eye too far off the ball, you will be distracted, but in order to avoid that from happening, you need good people around you to help you run it. And Franklin and Joe are a great example of that, where you need to have a good banker, investment banker, and commercial banker. But the investment banker really runs the process for you. And without an investment banker, without a good investment banker, you will be more distracted. You will get less for your company. And so they always pay for themselves. And so I think the distraction issue is a big one. You need to stay focused on your business. And you might have an earnout, and the earnout is only going to be achieved if you've been able to maintain that focus. Then final thing I had down was just on negotiation. This is getting down in the weeds a little bit, but just prioritization of issues. You're going to get, as you go through the sale process, you're going to have, one of the challenges, you might have 30 issues you got to figure out, and you're not going to win all of them. You got to figure out which ones are important to you, prioritize them, figure out how best to negotiate those to a resolution. Give where you can give, be flexible where you can be flexible, and then hang on to the ones that are near and dear to you. So that whole prioritization process, and that's going to happen throughout the whole M&A transaction process. You're going to be faced with prioritization, and that in terms of deal issues and in terms of other things as well. How are you going to prioritize the time you're spending on the deal versus the time you're spending on your business? But that's a big thing, is just making sure you've got your eye on prioritization, and it'll come up in a number of different ways. Then I'd say real quickly on the buy side, I think the big challenge that you have, to me the big challenge is just finding and evaluating good targets. It's one thing to say you're going to go out and we're going to grow our business now, we're going to go buy some businesses. Well, that's much easier said than done, because you can again get distracted from your core business by chasing things that aren't going to add a lot of value. And then finding the ones that will add value, and then figuring out how to execute on them, how to value them. I think that's, unless you've had a lot of experience in that area, that's a good time to reach out to your advisors to help you through that process as well.
Got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find the
You
right
do,
one.
yeah, you lift up this one, you lift up, you're looking under a lot of stones.
Speaking of advisors, Joe, tell us a little bit about how important it is to have the team of advisors understand the goals and objectives of the seller, as well as having that team work together throughout the process. You mentioned in your opening remarks about the basketball and NCAA tournament working together. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, and I'll go back to the point Mark made just a minute ago about prioritization. You do need a quarterback of the deal, and that's our job. But the team aspect of this is you can't make priorities as a business owner without advice from subject matter experts. And if they're not communicating with one another respectfully and listening to one another respectfully, you're not being well served. And there's lots of knobs on the dashboard to turn when it comes to negotiating final terms and conditions. Everything from price to payout to employment terms to representations and warranties, tax structure. So you really need, as a team, to collaborate on the must-have list and the nice-to-have list, knowing full well you're not going to get both lists. This is not going to happen. And you start out that negotiation with a fixed amount of negotiating capital. Different deals might have different capital, but for a given deal has fixed negotiating capital, and you better be of a single mind as to how you're going to play those cards and spend that capital. So to me, the team piece of this and the prioritization piece of this are linked very tightly. And if you're an owner, entrepreneur, and you're going to be well served by your team, that prioritization function needs to be very well attuned, because the buyer expects you and your organization to speak with one voice. So if I'm negotiating something that's got different elements to it, legal and tax and other things, we need to be of a one mindset, one voice when we go out to negotiate.
Great, thank you. Melissa, talk a little bit about the various options that are out there for financing for folks that, assuming they have their team all together and everybody's working together and we're all kumbaya and all that kind of stuff, and then a buyer comes to the table. What are some of the options for that buyer? What does a cap structure look like these days? And then also, assuming that a deal happens, talk a little bit about buyer's remorse.
Oh, sure. Great. Yeah, that's kind of a wide net there, but there are a lot of options out there depending on the deal size. So we have folks that do deal sizes 15 million plus. As a community banker, business bank, I'm doing deals $500,000 up to 15 million. So a little on the smaller side for some of you, right in that market. And there's other partners out there, alternative financing sources, there's factoring companies, there's even some government programs, MEDA, MCCD, the Metropolitan Consortium, community developers, all of those can be fantastic resources. Private equity firms are buyers as well. They're all over the Twin Cities and outside. So there's lots of options. I obviously look through the lens of a community banker, business bank, and when we're putting acquisitions together, we're looking for 25% down. And that 25% can come from a combination of cash and seller financing. And it's very rare for me to get on board with a deal that doesn't have seller financing. I've obviously done it, but I'm highly motivated with my buyer to get some aspect of seller financing, and that can look different depending on the deal and the earnouts and so forth. But with regard to seller financing, part that gets hung up throughout the transaction is if it is counted as equity, the seller needs to be on standby for 2 years. And that can be a little bit of a selling point that the buyer has to make with the seller in terms of they can't take any principal or interest payments on their seller note for 2 years if that's equity into the transaction. So I say that up front, but you'd be surprised then I get the PA or the seller's note and doesn't have that standby provision, and I'm back to the buyer saying you need more equity down because this seller note isn't equity, and so we're back to that situation again. But pretty rare for us also to do a deal without at least 5% cash from the buyer. We've done it before, but 5 to my owner's here, and he's like, what have we done? But yeah, it's pretty common. We do 10 to 25% cash, but the total equity piece is 25%. Then the other thing that we'll do as a bank is work with valuation experts. So we've got connections throughout the Twin Cities and national that firms that will come in and do a business valuation of the business that's being acquired, and that's another just opportunity for those stones to get unturned and go through all the aspects that those valuation experts look at, and we make sure they have all the accreditations to do a proper valuation for us and for our buyers. And our buyers use those in different ways. Sometimes that information of what that value comes in at is shared with the seller. Obviously, other times it's not, depending on how the contracts are structured and so forth. And then with regards to buyer's remorse, you know, after you do this long enough, you see that every once in a while. And working on a situation right now where, and what we see on our side with executives and other folks that have run big companies or been in charge of large departments, and they're traveling or they're just tired of making money for other people, they want to buy a business. So they'll work with an M&A advisor or brokerage firm and find a business they want to buy. It can take anywhere from 6 months up to 2 or 3 years to find that business. And so we've worked with those executives on those folks buying businesses, and for the most part it works out well. But every once in a while we get one where it just didn't work out. And for example, there's an executive that bought a business, and he has deep technical and financial background, and he bought a service-based business. And it turns out managing a 300-person team in India is a little different than a local business with 18 employees and mostly women, and just takes a little different approach with managing those folks versus your reports in India who you never see. And so major culture adjustment for those people and for the business owner. And so that deal was finalized at the end of last year, and here we are in March. He's now wanting to sell the business after just a couple months of running it because it's just not a good cultural fit. So what I remind my buyers time and time again is to just make sure you're looking at all aspects, including the culture of the business you're buying. If you're used to working with executives or doing things on a level within a business, and then you buy a company that is completely different and the employees are different than who you're used to working with, it can be a major adjustment, and the buyers just need to be prepared for that culture they're stepping into.
Great, thank you. Sure, go ahead.
Melissa touches on a point that I think makes the M&A game very challenging, and it's asymmetry. There's a big asymmetry between what the buyer, what the owner knows about his or her business, and what the buyer could ever find out about that business. And when you're in detailed due diligence, and you're the owner, the seller, you say to yourself, when are the stupid questions going to stop? Or, this guy doesn't trust me. Well, of course he doesn't trust you. Because there have been time and again, sellers have pulled the wool over buyers' eyes. So this asymmetry thing, don't take it personally. They may ask the same questions half a dozen different ways just to test the answer. But it's the only way to get past the obvious trust issue when you've got asymmetric information.
Great, thank you. Tom, you've been through the sales process a couple of times, most recently with Intertax, but twice before that. Was there a common thread through the process of selling companies that you picked up on?
Yeah, the first couple times I were either negotiated sales or we worked through kind of a real estate broker kind of arrangement. If your business is above a few million in sales, I don't think that's a good plan. I definitely would recommend as a business owner that you get involved early and often with an advisor, with a investment banker, and it just makes a world of difference. And don't try to do it yourself. You might be good at running the business, but you don't sell them enough to know how to know what you're doing, and you're just gonna give away things that you don't have to, and you're gonna get in trouble. So you're much better off working with somebody who really understands how the process works.
Okay, great, thank you. This is intended to be a group conversation. I have more questions here, but happy to weave in some of your questions if anybody would like to contribute. We got two over here. We'll start with the first one. Maggie?
Yeah. Maggie Linville-Smith from Linville Properties, and I came because we manage a commercial real estate portfolio throughout the Twin Cities, and we have a lot of tenants who are asking questions like this. And one of the questions that piqued my interest was this idea of the effective management team. And so, and I can empathize with the owner saying, if I sell, I want to take care of my team. I want to take care of the family that got me here. In your experience, and I don't care who answers this question, but after the purchase, when you put the management team together to maximize your sale price, if you had to give me an estimate based on your experience, how often is that management team still in place, let's say 5 years after the purchase?
Thank you. For those of you who maybe didn't hear the question over here, was a lot of variables go into a sale. If you look forward 5 years post transaction, how many of those management teams are still intact?
I can take a shot at that. I think part of what will differentiate is if you have a financial buyer, so someone that's coming in and is making a financial investment, but doesn't necessarily know the business all that well. They like the business area, but then the management team becomes critical to them. And both from the seller side and the buyer side, it's very important to have a management team. Then I think the likelihood, if they do their job of the management team being there for a foreseeable future, is pretty high. If it's a strategic buyer, it can be less so because they normally it's strategic. So they're coming in, they've got their own vision as to what they want to do with the company. They see ways they're going to improve it. They see ways that they can cut costs. So the management teams will not quite on as stable ground with the strategic, typically as they are with the financial. But a financial buyer, that's a big part of what they're buying because they know the owner. Okay, the owner just got a big check, and the owner is going to be a lot less motivated now. But then their job is it's very critical that there be a good management team in place for the financial buyer to operate that company on a go forward.
And we've seen a number of clients, owner-entrepreneurs, who've sold their businesses and treated the management team in the process as though they were shareholders, meaning they actually set aside a portion of the sale proceeds to pay a one-time bonus to the key members of the management team. It's not very tax efficient because it's ordinary income. I mean, there's no way to get around that. But what it does do is give the key management recognition for their role in the sale process, gives them some financial security, and in a couple of situations, it's given them the capital to invest alongside a private equity firm in the deal. And it was capital they otherwise wouldn't have had. So the wealth creation effect down the road can be significant in a situation like that.
I think the other piece that's really critical, is, especially on the buy side, is making sure you have the post-merger integration plan in place and checklists. And a lot of buyers really just say, well, I bought this company, now it should work. But you know, when we do post-merger integration, we have a checklist that's like 170 pages long that we go through, and a biggest piece of that is the people side of the equation. And you as a seller, if that's what you want to understand, the first question to ask is, what does your post-merger integration process look like? And if they don't have one, it's probably not going to work very well.
Actually, I think Deborah had hers up last time, so I'll get to her.
Well, I'm Deborah, but also the information team. But, you know, other than hiring you guys, which I know is really important, is there what I would call, for lack of a better word, a template of the things you should have ready when you're ready to sell your business? What are the documentation, the information that you should have available to the sellers? Is there something out there that kind of helps people at least get a general guideline before they come to you?
One way to prepare is you can get a typical buy-side due diligence checklist, and you can look through that list and say, okay, this is the type of information that a buyer is going to be asking. How am I doing on responding to all these items? So that's one way it can give you at least a rough idea as to what to be thinking about.
I would say the single biggest thing that you can have is a really good business. One that's growing, one that's making money, preferably growing.
It's got a great story ahead of it.
Yes, exactly. And have very solid technology, because the buyer, at least a strategic buyer like the one we had, wanted our technology. They did very deep due diligence on the software, make sure it was current, make sure it was working, make sure it was up to date technologically. The best, you just got to have a business that they really want.
And one thing our tax friend would tell us as well is to make sure the financial statements are in order. We talked about that before, but Buyers are going to be asking a lot of questions about the margins, about the add backs, and just make sure you're legit and genuine in your comments, because buyers will really rely on their trust of that seller when they're asking those financial questions. So make sure your financial house is in order and make sure you can explain it.
And Tom is being a little bit modest by only talking about the technology. I have to tell a little anecdote about him and his deal. About 10 days before the scheduled closing date, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I get a call from the CEO of the buyer. Now, all my red flags went up. The timing of this was not right, and I was very nervous about what the call was. And he started out by saying, you know, we really like this business, we want to do this deal, but we're only going to do it if Tom moves down to Dallas and runs the combined business, because I just fired our guy. Okay. and then Tom committed 2 years plus after that, running the combined businesses. So it goes beyond technology platforms.
Well, and moving to Dallas wasn't bad from a tax perspective either.
Did you get your residency changed before you sold?
Oh, yeah,
before the sale, right?
I was so gone.
So it's 2.5 years. Maybe you could give us a ballpark on what the cost of that is, and then even more important is, you know what you're buying, but you don't know who you're buying. And you brought it up in your conversations. What science tools and what kind of spin do you use to actually figure out what the culture is, who you're buying from, personality types, the fiduciary integrity?
So on the buy side, so what type of diligence do you do to make sure you know what you're getting what you think you're going to get? Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different layers of diligence that you need to go through. I mean, the starting point is whether or not the company's interesting to you. You kind of have a gut instinct on that, but then you've got to drill down at a lot of different levels. You've got to drill down. There's the legal side of the diligence. There's the financial. A lot of times people do I don't know if I'm using the right term, but the proof of earnings.
Quality of earnings.
I definitely understand, you know, what you're buying. I'm talking about what science are you using to know who you're buying? You know, there's lots of IO psychology tests and assessments. So really, what you're buying, you can actually validate that. But the who you're buying, from personality type to fiduciary integrity, because if you don't merge them right, you fail. You know, or you bought something you didn't think you were getting.
So the problem is, I as a seller and you as the buyer, I'm not going to let you test my people. It's one of those things that in the due diligence process with the people side, it's like dating. You know, you're going out to lunch, you're going out to dinner with the people that are going to remain, but that isn't allowed until, you know, a few weeks, months, you know, what's your experience, a month before you actually start talking to the detail level people. So part of this is, and that's why a lot of these mergers or acquisitions struggle, because you really don't know in detail what you're buying.
So if I'm hearing right, then it's actually a competitive advantage to do that and sell them. Is to have a complete cultural portfolio on your team and what they're about. Who's on the bus for the value creation plan? What seat there is?
So most buyers, when I was in private equity, I went to the management level, and this sounds really crude and crass, unless it was a very specialized industry where I couldn't get other people. I wanted to know who my management team was, what was their roles, what's their background. I wanted to understand them personally, but much past that, I can probably get what I need and create the culture that I want after that. You have the most experience in that, so.
It's fairly routine, at least in the private equity world, that private equity firms do detailed background checks on the top 8 or 10 people in the company. And most of the time that's routine because most of us live pretty clean lives. We were involved in a situation a few years ago where we signed a letter of intent. The private equity firm said, we're going to start background checks tomorrow. I said, great. They called 2 days later and said, well, we think we have a problem. Well, what's the problem? Well, the successor heir apparent CEO claimed to have had a certain undergraduate degree from a certain university, and he didn't. And if you remember 10 years or so ago when the Vikings were announcing they're hiring a head coach who claimed to have graduated from somewhere and didn't, well, it was the same sort of thing. And it created a trust issue. I mean, this guy was credible. I mean, he had a good career, but it created a fundamental trust issue. And we had to call a timeout on the entire transaction our client, the owners of the firm, had to fire him because if you know, it's trust, right? The guy lied. So what else might he have lied about or could lie about in the future? And we had to revisit the deal 30 days later with the buyer who was still interested, and we structured it in a way that there was a larger rollover by the sellers just to transition in through the hiring process. And they collaborated in hiring a new CEO. But, you know, it sounds rudimentary to do a background check on somebody. I mean, we can all access all kinds of public records for free. And this guy just didn't pass the basic test of claiming to have had a degree from a college he never graduated from.
Thank you. Adam, you've had your hand up a couple times.
Yes, Adam Sullivan. So, hypothetically, tomorrow I create a corporation with my mind on selling it eventually, an exit strategy. In between tomorrow and that day, I'm going to raise $10 million. Doesn't matter the amount. LLC versus C corporation. What are the pros and cons? Not so much in the investors along the way, but on the exit strategy. Am I set back by one or the other, or what are the other? I know it's a big question. But.
So if you're setting up a company? Okay.
In general, obviously a lot of things would go into that decision, but in general, the LLC is going to give you much greater flexibility. The C Corp or corporation is pretty structured, and with an LLC, you can have special allocations of funds, of income. It's just way more flexible. So my answer would be LLC.
Yeah. So just to clarify too, also from the buyer's standpoint, you know, what's going to be better? Do LLCs scare people? Are they unknown, etc.?
I would say we see mostly LLCs nowadays, so that they don't scare anybody.
One of the challenges with an S Corp is you got limited number of qualified S Corporation shareholders. It's also a pass-through entity which will facilitate the tax results you're looking for, but it's a lot less flexible an entity than an LLC. So I mean, it seems like 9 out of 10 businesses now, maybe even higher, that we organize for people are LLCs.
Why don't we go to this side of the room? I've been over there. Who's got a question over here, or anybody? Not a one. Okay, well, then I should have been looking this way. All right, you.
So from the time, you know, many business owners start and they have an exit plan, but many of them get to the point where they realize, wow, one day I need to do something. And before they get to the point where they might call Joe, there's sort of this nebulous thought. I'm a financial advisor, so I see this kind of nebulous thought of, gee, one day I need to sell. So what kind of advice would you give to a business owner as they really start early on exploring your options?
We do that a lot. We start with not a formal valuation, but an allocation of cash flow, depending upon a financial, strategic, management ownership group to understand after-tax cash flow, how it's allocated, why. So the buyer, so they understand what the buyer is going to get, what they're going to get after tax, and first, is that enough? And so that helps clarify in their own mind. Our second process is we really go in and do seller due diligence. And what that is, we do a seller due diligence light, so they understand what the process is, and then when they get closer, we do a seller due diligence. We always bring an investment banker in to explain the process and what's going to happen in that process, and if they're ready to sell. Generally, a lot of times they're not ready, and the seller due diligence gives the prioritized list of what activities they need to do as a business to get ready so they can maximize the value of the business.
One of the other resources that can be really valuable are what I call peer-to-peer resources. So whether it's the CEO roundtable or the president's roundtable, but there are a number of organizations that bring together 8 to 10 to 12 business owners on a regular basis over a period of time. In fact, we met Tom originally through a fellow CEO roundtable member who we had worked with. So it's a great referral network for us, but more importantly, from a resourcing standpoint, that peer-to-peer resource is really valuable because you get to kind of share in a very intimate, confidential setting your own issues with people who are facing the same sort of issues.
Yeah, I was on the CEO roundtable, and it was in fact a very, very, very good resource. because you're basically sharing your details of your business with 10 other business owners or 8 other business owners that are in your round table and bouncing ideas back and forth. And they'd seen things that you hadn't, and you'd seen things that they hadn't. And there was a prior offer to buy our business that we actually shared that information in the CEO roundtable, and the consensus of the group was it wasn't a good deal, and I agreed with that. So, you know, it really was very helpful.
The only other thing that I would add to all that, those are all really good points. This got mentioned earlier, but don't let circumstances dictate when you're going to sell. I mean, you know where your business is, you know, so that's part of it. You can kind of see we're on a good path here, because you don't want to sell when people see you're going to be falling off the edge of a cliff, or when you're falling off the edge of a cliff. And the market dictates that too. I mean, it's a good time to be selling a business right now. There's a lot of money out there chasing deals. Interest rates are low, so that has an impact on it as well. But don't let circumstances dictate. Be strategic about picking the time.
Hey, Brad, from a financial perspective, last question about advice for somebody who's not quite ready to sell, but kind of exploring it and thinking about it, but kind of chime in from a financial perspective, because they probably need some runway in your world to get ready to talk to somebody like a Jill.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it earlier, you know, sometimes getting an audit ahead of time, the buyer places a lot of reliance on that in addition to their due diligence. But, you know, a lot of the deals are based on EBITDA, so you want to clean up your financial statement. Like I mentioned earlier, get rid of some of the questionable items that might be in there, and really, you know, drive your earnings to get a better multiple or better number.
Question right here in front.
On that point, what are kind of the going EBITDA multiples, and what's the sort of the time frame on the earnouts right now, and how do you get the seller to get more reasonable?
Good one for you.
I wasn't reasonable.
I wasn't reasonable.
One of the things that we did is, because I was prepared to leave the business at the point when we sold it, we pro forma all my costs of my salary, bonus, whatever I had in there, out of the financials before we actually took it to market. And it turned out to be very beneficial in a strange way you wouldn't expect, because that's why they said, well, if you're not going to be part of this business ongoing, you're available to go run this other division of our business. And so, you know, be careful what you wish for. But it actually was good. And in terms of, with a strategic buyer, I'm convinced that they weren't looking at our EBITDA as much as they were looking at our volume, our sales, and our ability to take our company with 3 salespeople, roll it into their company with 50 salespeople, and continue to exponentially grow the business. So they were less concerned about the EBITDA and more concerned about the technology and the growth and what we'd been able to do specifically in taking their customers away from them. So it was, I can't speak to the numerical numbers there.
And maybe, first of all, not all deals have earnouts. In fact, I'd argue most deals don't have earnouts. It depends on the nature of the business. We sold a professional services firm 2 years ago, where the asset goes up and down the elevator every night. I mean, it's a, you know, right? Professional services. The key principal signed on for a 3-year earnout because there wasn't a buyer in the world that wouldn't want to keep them incented for at least 3 years. We've done manufacturing transactions where there were no earnout. It was cash on a barrel. There might have been a holdback for reps and warranties, but there was no economic earnout. You know, on multiples, a multiple is just kind of a snapshot. It's a metric that's driven really by growth and profitability. And, you know, you hear about companies selling for 12, 14, 15 times EBITDA. Well, they've got 25% growth and 25% EBITDA margins, or better. Whereas a company that's growing single digit with a 10% EBITDA margin might sell for 5 or 6 times EBITDA. So it really depends on the specific industry and the specific circumstances. But at the end of the day, growth and profitability trump everything.
Yeah, to answer your question, we subscribe to a service that gives us closely held mid-market companies, and the average on that, I just recently looked at it, was like 5.1 times EBITDA. And And typically it was from 4 to 7.
Yeah.
Last question, and then I'm going to do a couple of things here.
It strikes me there's some melange of time to prep yourself for sale, the industry that you're in, and this question over here, number of interested parties. Right? It's like when you sell your house, right? You want 3 or 4 people who are interested in your house, right? So I don't know, anybody can take this one. Can you speak to the process of getting multiple truly interested parties around the table so that you can bid things up a little bit too, and then that kind of keeps people a little bit more honest?
Yeah, I'll make a quick comment and let these guys go into the detail on it, but from my standpoint, a lot of people get approached, you know, the one-offs, I'm interested in your company. That type of process is almost destined to fail. I've been down that path with clients a number of times, and they say, no, so-and-so is really interested, I'm gonna work with them. It's like one buyer, no buyer. So I think it's really important to have multiple people out there to keep the process honest. Because what I would very much discourage is getting one of those flyers, talking to that person, and trying to do a deal with that one person. Even if you know them better than that, that's a real challenge.
We have a lot of clients that ask us to manage the process of the sale. That's not what we're in the business to do. We don't have the research capabilities. That's why we always involve the investment banker. They do that day in, day out. They're in the business. They know how to do the research to get the universe of companies that are available, how to contact them, how to weed it through the muck. And you know, that's really the investment banker's job, to help with creating an auction situation.
This is going to sound trite, but the world is very flat. and you know, when a 5-person M&A boutique in Minneapolis can, in theory, reach the same prospective buyers that a bulge bracket firm in New York can reach globally, in almost every deal we're reaching cross-border buyers. It's all research driven. It's all transparent data. Now you have to subscribe to the data services. You have to do the work, but the tools are there now for that sort of phenomenon to take place. But we, you know, typically we sit down with, you know, the owner, and we start with the usual suspects. I call it the trade show trap, right? So everybody in here's been to trade shows over their career. You know, the typical thing, there's alcohol and a steak usually involved at some point during a trade show, and people share all kinds of dirty little secrets with one another, and you think that, you know, your pal from the trade show is going to be your ideal buyer. Occasionally they are. Most of the time they're not. If they were, it would have already happened. But we start out with that kind of circle, and we grow the circle via research, the target circle via research.
Okay, so 2 quick questions from my side, but try to hit a stop that's close to 1 o'clock, so 30 seconds and answer. First question is, what's a typical mistake that you see throughout this process from the lens that you all look at? 30 seconds, any particular
Buyer or seller, both?
Whatever you want.
Seller is not being prepared and not getting the right advisors involved at the right time.
There's a great saying that my mentor way back in the day used over and over again, called pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered, so don't be a hog, be a pig.
Yep.
I would say for a buyer to just be thoughtful about change, but when you're rolling it out, and employees are people, and to just be really mindful of the fact that they're fearing their new owner and what's going to come down the pike. So just communicate benefits, take them out to lunch, talk through the process, and just make sure that communication is open with the employees.
I can't say more about how well the process went, so I don't have a lot of downsides here to share. It really did go well. Possibly just what's going to happen next as the seller. What are you going to do next?
And I think, and I'm an accountant, so I'm not a good salesperson, but not to harp on the fact that get your team together. When we've seen things go bad is when they didn't contact us in time, and they've already gone down a path that you can't reverse. So get your team together ahead of time.
And I don't know if this is technically a mistake, but it's certainly a common challenge, and it's deal fatigue. This is a very emotionally intense, very time-consuming process. and at the same time you're trying to run your business, you're also trying to, you know, stay in the cockpit on the deal. It's tough, and almost everyone we've worked with has hit a point where they've effectively said, I'm done. What they're really saying is, help me. But deal fatigue is a real issue, and it's just something to be aware of as you go through the process.
Okay, one last question to close up. Anything that you want to wrap everything up in a nice bow to send everybody away with, but again, 30 seconds.
I'll say it in about 5 seconds. You have to plan ahead of time and be ready for it. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. So it's a marathon, not a sprint. So be ready, be planful.
As a seller, be emotionally prepared to be emotionally racked.
I'll just talk about a couple books that you've probably read. Good to Great. If you haven't read that, read it. And The Tipping Point. I think both of those are good reads.
I jotted down plan ahead, assemble a good team of, you know, all those, kind of repeating what everyone else has said, but that probably can't be too much overemphasized.
Ditto.
Keep a sense of humor.
Yeah, try to enjoy it. I mean, it's the most important thing you're going to do in your business career a lot of times, so make sure you keep that in perspective. I think that was Tom's comment a little bit too, just, you know, although it's the other side of it, you're going to get beat up, but try to enjoy it.
Great. Well, let's thank our panelists. Thank you all for coming, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.